Today is the start of a full arc of Pokemon Monster Hunter fusions in my ongoing series, the Trismegistus Academy. See, in this series, I've been kinda tiptoeing around pop culture adaptations, but that's just not working for me anymore. It feels like I'm hindering the quality of this series by doing that, with my Multiverse Tales spin-off series like Mytholethal and Fear of the Demon Hunters, not having direct copywritten characters makes sense, because I can do mythology characters and creatures in one, adapt dinosaurs and phobias and zodiac signs into demons in another, but in a mainline Multiverse Tales story, it feels like trying to avoid direct pop culture adaptations is like trying to make a Spider-Man cinematic universe without Spider-Man. You could technically do it, but why? So let's get into the start of the Pokemon Monster Hunter arc, shall we? Let's go!
Hit like if you want, subscribe if you feel like, but either way, enjoy the show.
Now, please remember, students, while you are absolutely permitted to defend yourselves if any of the creatures you encounter today do get hostile, our intent for this field trip is simply to observe and learn about the worlds we are visiting. As well, of course, to take whatever photographs you feel inspired to take as we go on this adventure, hence the cameras you've all been provided. We will share the photographs as a group when we return in 2 days. Headmistress Trismegistus seemed to be in a particularly pleasant mood as she addressed the Maverick class and their upper year support students. Jake Tajin would normally have been incredibly excited about a trip like the one they were about to set off on. These kinds of treks to other realms were planned to occur at least a year later in the Maverick class's schooling, but because they'd been making more progress than expected, their education timeline had been bumped up. If they were going to be multiverse-traversing superheroes someday, they needed to do a fair amount of exploring during their studies to grasp what kinds of worlds they'd be protecting. On top of that, Jake and his class had come up with the initial workings of a plan they were all happy with to take down Eloise Ludum, with help from 3 of the students from her dreaded Ludum Academy for Fearsome Fighters. Jake was also feeling quite respected by his fellow students ever since his inspiring actions in their first Resilience Combat training class had helped most of the Mavericks complete the grueling training course before the time was up. In theory, everything was going great for Jake. But an issue had been bubbling just below the surface of Jake's conscious attention for some time now, and he realized it was finally time to deal with it. He knew it was something that could make his goal of someday forming and running the multiverse's greatest team of superheroes a bit more difficult. Evangeline Trismegistus wrapped up her speech to the students, and they were given 10 more minutes to do whatever they needed to do before leaving. Jake looked around at the staff coming with them to consider who he could talk to about his issue. He wanted to deal with it today, preferably early in the day so he could focus on all the awesome creatures they were about to go see. Headmistress Evangeline Trismegistus, Professor Strone Goggins, and Counselor Louisa Hay attended with them. Counselor Hay generally gave the best advice of all the staff at the school, but this was something Jake was more comfortable talking to a guy about. Goggins was the only male staff member coming, but this wasn't the sort of thing he'd want to talk to a guy as intense as Strone about. Jake's eyes panned across the group around them until he spotted his assigned upper year student, Velignus, or Yarrow Mwangi. The flame-headed skateboarder was joking around with another of the upper years, Kalia. Jake and one of his now closest friends, Darwin, had been assigned to Velignus as their upper year support when they first got to the school, so Jake knew him pretty well by now. The flame-spewing hero was, ironically, a pretty cool guy, and very easy to go to for help and advice. But was he the right person to ask about this?
Are you okay, Jake?
Anna's voice made Jake jump more than he expected, and clearly more than she did too. Sorry, Anna, I guess I was really in my head just now. Normally, Anna was a great person to talk to as well. Jake had known her for longer than anyone else he knew. She was the first person he'd become close with after his parents and brother had died. Unfortunately, she was, in a way, part of the problem he needed to solve. She went on.
Oh, okay, well, hey, do you want to see if Kalia and Velignus are cool with our groups exploring together? I know we're supposed to split up, but Velignus and Kalia are close, so maybe they'd be okay with it.
Jake was instinctively about to jump on this opportunity, but realized it would get in the way of him handling his issue.
Yes, but could we join our groups later in the day? I just have something I want to talk to Velignus about, and it's like sort of a guy thing.
She nodded.
Oh, okay, yeah, sure. When you're done with that, just let me know and we can try and talk Kalia and Velignus into it.
Each camera the students had been given had communications tech built in, so the students could contact each other and the staff. They could also use it to upload their photos to a collective server as soon as they were taken. But more importantly, it could let them call in the headmistress if they needed her. As tough as the students were, some of the monsters, or Pokevyrn, as the locals called them in the world they were headed to, were particularly monstrous. Everyone separated into their groups. Jake was determined that one way or another his life was going to change by the end of that day. But he didn't know the extent to how chaotic the next 2 days would get. The headmistress swirled her hands in a mesmerizing pattern, and a glowing purple ring appeared above all the students and staff. She waved her hands down and the ring enveloped them, changing their surroundings as they were transported into dimension P138. As expected, they were at a point where 5 distinct environmental planes intersected. But what they didn't expect to see was another group of students brawling with a monster.
Come now, Alzaya, surely you can evade the beast better than that. Sammy, if you can't stretch yourself longer than the Veuasaur's tongue, then what good are your powers anyway? Waru, not even intending to try your hand at the beast, Continue to act like this and you'll slip even farther down the top 7 rankings.
Headmistress Trismegistus stepped between her students and the group of Ludum Academy students and staff surrounding a towering frog-like beast with a massive flower and whipping vines sprouting from its back. The students were doing their best to take it down, but its colossal stretchy tongue was keeping them all at a distance. The tall fit student leaned up against a nearby rock face, shrugged. I'm letting the C-listers handle this one. If I'm spending 2 days in a Pokemon Monster Hunter knockoff world, then I'm definitely saving my strength for when the main event shows up. Evangeline called out, Eloise, what are you doing here? Ludum turned, and her already wide smile grew even wider and more frightening.
Oh, Evangeline! What a completely and utterly unexpected coincidence. Are you also bringing your students here to hunt monsters? What are the odds of all places in the multiverse we'd come to the exact same spot on the exact same day?
Evangeline paused before responding. As you are evidently hinting, I'm sure this is not a coincidence. Eloise looked cartoonishly and sarcastically shocked.
Why, whatever do you mean? How could I possibly know you'd be coming here? Why, for that to be true, I'd need to have something like a mole on the inside of your school, and an upstanding establishment such as your own would never allow for something like that to put your students at risk, now would it?
The LAFF students noticed the Mavericks and seemed pretty shocked themselves. Jake locked eyes with Alzaya, who suddenly appeared terrified. They both looked away from each other, not wanting to give any evidence to suggest that they were working together. Could Ludum really have a mole in Tahe? If she did, is there any chance they already knew about the plan to take her down? Evangeline relaxed her shoulders. However you knew of our field trip, it does not change our plans. I simply ask that our students do not engage in any conflicts with each other while we are here. They can save that for the combat tournament in a few months. Ludum shrugged.
Oh, of course. Besides, my students are here to face a real challenge.
She turned back.
Waru, if you do nothing in this fight, your rank drops from 2nd to 6th. I may even send you to the Little Lands just for the fun of it.
Waru rolled his eyes and 3 different colored glowing orbs appeared around him. He called the red one into his chest. His muscles grew larger. He took 1 step from the wall, turned, and punched it with all his might. Stones and dirt erupted around him and cracks ran up the wall. He leapt right next to the monster's hind leg and grabbed it. He heaved and swung it around, tossing it under the now crumbling rock face. Boulders smashed into the creature, pinning it to the ground, and soon burying it. There, I killed it, so someone else can dig it out and make the armor from it. Call me when someone spots a Charathalos. The LAFF students being present almost threw Jake off his goal for the day. If Ludum did have a mole in Tahe, why would she have admitted it so openly? Beyond that, why would Alzaya, Waru, and their new friend Katas still be alive? A psychopath like Ludum would have killed them the second she learned that some of her students were planning to betray her. Unfortunately, that just confirmed that the mole wasn't one of the Maverick students who knew about the plan. There could still be a mole somewhere else in the school. Jake wrote it off for now as just Ludum trying to get in Evangeline's head. Jake had other matters to focus on. He, Darwin, and Velignus had separated from the others and decided to go into the region where mostly fire and magma-based creatures could be found, near the Moon Oil Basin. It was Velignus' idea. Since he was immune to any fire and heat-based attacks, he figured they could risk getting closer to some of the creatures they'd see there. If they attacked, he could distract the beast while Jake and Darwin got away, then he could catch up on the flying, flaming skateboard he brought everywhere. They could all move pretty fast through the mountains, with Jake using his own flight, Velignus on his board, and Darwin having summoned his Pachycephalosaurus Quixote to ride. He could have summoned a bigger and faster creature, but they didn't want his own monster to come across as a challenge to any of the apex Pokevyrn in the region. Jake had been to a lot of worlds with monsters, beasts, and dragons, but this one sounded particularly cool to him. At age 16, the villagers of the local town, Lavakoto, are given the opportunity to hunt down a Pokevyrn partner. If they are strong enough to defeat a beast in combat, it will become bound to them as an ally. Though many people in this world also hunt the creatures to forge armor from them as well. Jake was happy at the Trismegistus Academy, but making this place a home seemed like it would be a pretty sweet life to live too. Jake, Darwin, and Velignus got near the main mountain in the center of the region and moved down into some caves beneath it.
This is it, boys. Last time I came here with a school trip, I tried to find an Infernacan, but there was none to be seen. This time I am sure we will find one. They have a flaming dome just like me, boys. Are you ready?
They both nodded, Darwin more enthusiastically than Jake. They started walking down into the musty, humid caves, and as nervous as Jake was to bring it up, he asked, "Hey, Velignus, and I guess you too, Darwin, can I ask you something kind of personal?" Velignus turned to look him in the eyes as he kept walking.
Of course, Jacob. If I can help you with it, I certainly will.
Darwin nodded too. Jake took a breath, looking at his feet as he spoke. "Well, I've got this problem. I've known I had it for a while, but it just kind of sunk in recently that I'm pretty overdue to deal with it." Velignus grinned.
Well, already, Jake, I commend you for realizing you needed to make a change and for being open enough to ask someone for help. Go on.
As Jake should have expected, Velignus was already making this a lot easier for him. "Thanks. Well, see, my problem is I kind of feel like I have a crush on a new girl, like, every 5 minutes. The meditation stuff Professor Dispenza teaches us is okay for helping me not think about it so much, but it can get really distracting. I just want to stop thinking about it, you know?" The only thing Jake kept to himself was the fact that he worried that when he did run a team of superheroes in the future, he couldn't constantly jump between crushes on the different female members. It would hinder his ability to lead them and give instructions impartially. Jake was anxious as he said every word, but neither Velignus or Darwin gave the slightest hint of making fun of him for what he said. Velignus seemed like he was trying to repress some kind of reaction, but Jake couldn't tell what. He stopped, with them all having leveled out on a low floor of the caves, surrounded by tunnels and pathways.
So, Jake, it is advice around girls and romance you are looking for me to help you with?
I guess? Velignus clenched his fist and fire burst around it.
Long have I waited for this day, Jacob.
He pointed at Jake and nearly yelled.
You could not have come to a better person for this, Jake. For I dealt with the exact same problem when I was your age, and I was the most insecure person you had ever met when it came to romance. Counselor Hay and others helped me through the various stages of building confidence in that regard, and now I can speedrun you through all the things you will ever need to learn on the matter.
Jake was shocked by his enthusiastic response. Wow, really? That's great. Where do we start?
We start by running and flying away very quickly.
What? Why? He pointed back down the tunnel they'd entered from.
Because the Infernacan seems very displeased with my shouting.
Jake and Darwin whipped around to see a stone-skinned ape-like beast with a flaming head bounding off the walls towards them. Darwin leapt back onto Quixote, Velignus onto his board, and Jake leapt into the air. Velignus trailed behind the other two, and Jake could hear the snapping of his camera as he took picture after picture.
Finally getting pictures of the Infernacan and being asked for romantic advice on the same day. What a day this is!
Jake tried to keep going in as straight a line as possible so they could find their way back easily, but the tunnels didn't permit a straight line. He turned and weaved, already feeling his flight having improved after all the runs he did in the first Resilience combat class. Unfortunately, he soon saw a cliff ledge coming up ahead, and Darwin's dino couldn't fly. He called back, "Velignus, there's a cliff coming up." Velignus cheerily replied, "Wonderful, that is what we needed. Get as close to the walls as you can, boys." They did as instructed, and Velignus dropped down so his flying board was just above the ground. "Come along, pretty monkey, come catch the flaming man." Velignus shot past Jake and Darwin, and the bounding beast thundered by them on his trail. It shrieked furiously as it neared the cliff. Velignus was riding backwards, egging the beast on. Come, keep following, eyes on me." Its eyes did indeed remain locked on Velignus. He flew over the ledge but kept going straight as if there was still ground. The creature didn't seem to notice and kept running until its feet had nothing to land on. It tumbled off the cliff down at least 100 feet before clutching the wall and sliding down another long ways until it finally slowed to a stop. Velignus blew it a kiss, then flew back over to Jake and Darwin. "It may still come back for us, so perhaps we should find a safer place to speak, boys." They hurried back to the tunnel where they'd entered. Jake hadn't remembered how to get there, but Velignus led them as if he were on a trail he'd followed 100 times before. They got back up and out of the base of the mountain. As they moved, Velignus spoke. "Jake, the first thing you should know about romance, relationships, and crushes is that this topic is one of the biggest points of insecurity for many people from many different worlds and cultures. Having anxiety around discussing it is very common, but also not necessary when you have a seasoned professional like me sharing my experience. So, with that said, why don't you tell me, why do you consider having crushes to be a problem in the first place, Jake was surprised by the question. I mean, I just, like I said, it's distracting. Well, do you think it is genuinely distracting in its own right, or is the distracting part simply you thinking it is a problem to be this way? Sometimes the only reason we have a problem is because we think something that is completely normal is a problem. What if I told you that at 13 years old, or really any age, it is very normal to feel as you do, Jake shrugged. I mean, I guess that would be kind of comforting, but it doesn't seem like anyone else thinks about this stuff nearly as much as I do. That is simply because most people are too afraid to talk about it. Not everyone, some do not care as much, or even at all about romance and such relationships, but many are just too scared to accept that they have these feelings. Because it is a topic that many have insecurities about, when some people hear others openly discussing their feelings and desires, they may even jump to attacking that person. Not even knowing why, they simply think this is the way you react to someone being open and vulnerable about romantic interests. In truth, they are attacking themselves over their own repressed feelings. Jake turned to Darwin. Do you have a crush on anyone? He shrugged. Not right now, but I have before, and obviously I'd never make fun of you for it. Unless you had a crush on someone who sucked, maybe. Can't have a friend dating a girl who I don't want to hang out with too. Jake smirked and nodded thankfully. Velignus went on. Knowing how others often respond to this topic, I myself was too afraid to discuss things like this when I was your age. I too had a new crush every time a new girl walked past me. This used to cause me great anxiety. One thing I learned about myself, and this may not be the case for you, was the reason I jumped from one crush to the next so often was because subconsciously I knew that if I settled on just one, the one I really wanted to be with at a certain time, I'd actually have to do the most terrifying thing I could imagine. And tell her how I felt. Jake felt like a light switch had just been turned on. Whoa, that actually might be exactly the same for me too. I mean, I kinda daydream a lot about actually telling a girl how I feel, but the idea of doing it in real life has always felt like, I guess, not a real thing I could actually just do without people making fun of me. Velignus skipped happily. Excellent! Then if that is the case, I have the perfect advice for you on how to decide between all your crushes you've had, who you should actually ask on a date. Counselor Hay shared this with me, and I think it is as brilliant as it is simple. Jake interrupted. Thanks, but honestly, I actually know already who I want to be with. After what you've said, it just kind of feels obvious. Velignus paused. Oh. Well, can I share this anyway? The floodgates are open, and all my advice wants to pour out. Jake chuckled. Sure, go ahead. Perfect! The best thing to do if you like many people is consider, if I did not have romantic feelings for any of these people and was simply deciding who I wanted to be closer friends with and spend more time with, who would I choose?
Whoever you'd want to spend time with the most as a friend and enjoy the company of is likely the best person to try getting romantic with. The foundation of a great romance is great friendship. That is why I asked Kalia out a few weeks ago."
Jake was shocked. "Wait, you did? I didn't know you guys were dating." He laughed.
"Oh, we are not. She said no. She said she was not interested in finding a relationship right now and just wanted to remain friends."
Jake was surprised by how relaxed he seemed about it. "And that was just fine? I mean, you guys still seem like you're pretty cool with each other."
"Of course. I was honest with her, she was honest with me, so we got through it just fine. I was obviously sad and disappointed because I was sure she was going to be interested in me as more than a friend. But just because someone rejects you romantically, that does not mean there is anything wrong with you, and it does not mean there is anything wrong with them. Everyone has specific things they're looking for romantically, and it is not an offense to you if they are not interested in you that way. And most importantly, the true prize of telling someone how you feel is not in whether they are interested in you back. It is in the very fact that you had the courage to be honest and open with them in the first place. If they do not want to be with you, then they are really doing you a favor by saving you for a person who will be ecstatic to be with you."
Jake was a bit nervous about the fact that Velignus had been sure Kalia was into him when he asked her out, because Jake had a strong inkling that the person he liked was into him too, but he knew he could be wrong. Besides that, though, Jake had never felt more sure about what he needed to do.
Thanks, Velignus. That really helps a lot. Speaking of Kalia, any chance we could go meet up with her and her group? I've got something I want to talk to Anna about.
Darwin's hand shot up. "I knew it!" Velignus called Kalia and asked where she, Anna, and Amelia Blonsky had ended up. They'd gone to the Sarrowwind Plains, hoping to find a legendary apex Pokevyrn that had recently been spotted in that area. It was called the Zapdos, and while the region it lived in was fairly desolate, it was also rife with harsh winds, rain, and fierce lightning storms. Some believe that the storms were not a part of this region until the Zapdos appeared, and it brought them due to its own body's ability to produce lightning. Others think it was drawn to this region because it sought to absorb the electricity. Either way, it had resided there for centuries, and most who entered its domain hoped not to come across it. Anna, Kalia, and Amelia had taken a rest near a large wind farm. Velignus had been there on a past trip and knew where it was. Darwin let Quixote rest and summoned his Thalassadromius called Panther, so they could all fly. They headed towards the windmill farm, and Jake's stomach sloshed around in his flight with a mix of anxiety and excitement. Working with Anna in the Resilience Combat class had reminded him of the feelings he'd had for her on and off ever since they met. They'd been through so much together. They'd survived and escaped Baxel's prison, fought monsters and demons with the Sharp Gang, and now gone to a multiversal superhero school together. Anna had always been there for Jake, and while he hadn't seen it before, the only thing keeping him from telling her that he cared about her as more than a friend had been fear. No matter how it went down, Jake was overcoming that fear today. Jake didn't even let himself think about how he was going to say it. He wanted it to feel as natural as possible, and knew overthinking it wouldn't help. The closer they got, the more amplified his excitement and nerves got. They got well into the right territory, and through the thick clouds in the air, Jake could make out some silhouetted windmills in the distance. Unfortunately, the last leg of their flight would be far more difficult than the first. Jake felt all the hairs across his body stand up on end. He turned and saw Darwin reacting as though he felt the same. Before they could both turn to Velignus, his voice called out,
"Dive, boys, dive!"
Jake just barely started soaring towards the ground in time to get below a massive swooping form that chomped at him. The wind from its body hit Jake like a linebacker, and he started spinning out. He regained control quickly and turned to check on Darwin, who had also gotten out of the way in time. Unfortunately, the massive golden beast that had flown at them was circling back around quickly and was leering at Darwin. It seemed they'd been right the first time about an apex Pokevyrn feeling threatened by one of Darwin's bigger beasts. As Jake and Darwin descended quickly, Velignus flew into the Zapdos' path.
Come, you sparking turkey bird. A little lightning doesn't bother me."
Electricity exploded from the dragon's mouth right at Velignus. It struck him and sent him spinning back on his board. But it just made the flames on his head and feet ignite the rest of his body in a burst.
"Hoo-hoo! Let's go, turkey bird. Hit me with that again, would you?"
The Zapdos tucked its wings and dove right for him. Just as it got close to tackling him from the sky, Velignus tucked his legs up and rode his skateboard along its back and tail. Unfortunately, it kept diving past Velignus, right for Darwin. Jake saw this and slowed his flight, moving right into the monster's path. He made 2 globs of green energy appear in his hand and hurled them into the monster's face. It was only enough to make it blink, but in that time, Jake flew forward and snatched the creature's head. The lightning sparking off it nearly made Jake let go, but he wasn't letting it get to Darwin. He threw back his hand and punched the creature right in the eye. Its head whipped to the side and it shrieked. It opened its wings and slowed, but it also chomped onto Jake's leg and made him cry out in pain. He was durable, but he felt its teeth pierce through his skin. It whipped him around and hurled him straight for the ground. He tried slowing down but was moving too fast this time. He closed his eyes and braced for a hard impact. But felt none. In fact, other than a hand gripping his arm, he felt nothing at all. He opened his eyes and all was blackness for a moment, until he was pulled up, out of the stony, sandy ground. His body suddenly became tangible again, and he quickly turned to see a familiar face holding him.
Jake, are you okay?
Anna said, looking him up and down. A nervous smile spread across his face. Yeah, I'm great. Thanks, Anna. Good catch. Anna held him for another moment, then blushed, and they both turned back to the action. Jake could feel the burning cuts in his leg from the monster's teeth, but it was manageable. He could heal himself later. Jake looked over to see Darwin landing and getting Panther to cover. Velignus was keeping the Zapdos distracted for the moment. Jake said, Darwin's buddy must have gotten it really mad. Maybe if you unsummon Panther, it'll back off. Anna shook her head.
No, it wasn't you guys getting it riled up. It was them.
Anna pointed up in the opposite direction. Jake followed her finger, realizing that he hadn't even seen half of the problem yet. Part of Jake was relieved that the LAFF students were really the ones causing problems, but it didn't change the fact that clearly the Zapdos was not their biggest concern.
Don't worry, we are going to get a Chirathalos at some point, but, might be end of the 2nd episode, maybe the 3rd episode. We'll get there, I promise. If you enjoyed this, you might want to check out my first 2 Pokemon Monster Hunter Fusion episodes that I did a few years ago. They're not set in this same storyline, but they are set in this same world that this story is happening in. In fact, the previous episode of the Trismegistus Academy series revolved around Pokemon as well, when I was redesigning some Pokemon sprites that I made in high school to work into the series. So maybe you want to check that out, or just go back to the start of the Trismegistus Academy series, watch the whole thing. But besides that, that's all for today, except of course for ending this video on some kind of positive or inspiring note, and the thought I want to leave people with today is something that I've probably done a few times before, but I think it's just a good reminder to just take a moment and feel into your body right now. Are there emotions or physical feelings that you're trying to distract yourself from by watching lots of different YouTube videos? Hopefully you're just, watching stuff to enjoy it. But is there anything you're consciously avoiding right now? Maybe take a minute to just settle into yourself and feel those things. And let yourself feel them without any judgment. That could help them pass through you and go away. Hope that helps someone out there. I love you all, and I'll see you all in the next episode on Monday, in which I'll finally be announcing the Mytholethal book launch date.